Welcome back to Ladies of Another View, and we've been visiting with Scott Padfield, who is with the Free Enterprise Project, and they are part of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Love them. We often have guests on that's with the National Center that are fighting back against the woke culture, that are speaking up, making sense, and not just letting them get away with some of the craziness that everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess there's nothing we can do about it. But we've been talking about your fight against woke corporations. And I want to say there's a bit of arm twisting that went on. So it's not like, okay, we'll do this. There was pressure applied. And Carmen, during the break, you mentioned a question that fits in with this.
Yeah, and Stefan, I wondered if you would speak to, ESG. We hear a lot about it. But also, how the politics has played into this, how the rewarding corporations with public-private partnerships, which I've had a problem with for many years, and they're just on steroids now. And I wonder if you could address how all those pieces fit together.
Certainly. So I think one of the key points that you're sort of alluding to is this idea of crony capitalism, right? I think those of us on the right tend to really be defenders of capitalism, and sometimes you'll hear people on the left say, well, this is just capitalism in action. These are just, sort of private entities doing what they think is best. But it's really better described as crony capitalism, which is we have essentially, at least one of the drivers here is a government that under the current administration is all in on, for example, this climate change agenda that is extremely radical. And even if you take a bigger step back and you talk about things like the influence of the World Economic Forum and just this push towards more and more centralization. Certainly we saw this coming, into and out of the COVID lockdowns. So this all comes together in a way where, the government actors for their part can claim, oh, this is just private institutions doing what they think is best. But just a perfect example is the whole electric vehicle push. There's really seems to be no actual demand on the consumer basis. The technology does not seem to be there in terms of creating the product in a way that would generate the demand. So there's just more and more money being pushed into this endeavor, under this industrial planning that really doesn't look like it's heading in a very good direction at all. And most likely, if we did actually leave the market to do its own thing, there would be the innovation to solve these problems that would occur naturally in a capitalistic free market setting. So to bring that all back to ESG ends up being, and we're talking about environmental, social, and governance factors. And again, a lot of the advocates will tell you, oh, this is just another way of determining expected value. But those of us that are critics say, you already had that, right? The general fiduciary duty to maximize value includes becoming informed of all material information reasonably available. So if climate change is materially a risk, you're already including that. So by focusing on this ESG, we become very suspicious that you're doing something else. And then when you actually look at the platforms, I'm fond of saying if you go through, for example, As You Sow is sort of on the other side of this, as we are at the Free Enterprise Project, and you look at their agenda and what they're pushing for, and then you compare it with, for example, Elizabeth Warren or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are pushing, they're indistinguishable. There's no lining between them, no light that comes between them. So to suggest this is somehow apolitical, neutral value determination, it just doesn't pass the smell test. So ESG ends up becoming a framework that allows both the government and interested radical actors in various institutions to push forward under the veneer of free market and private choice, when it's actually really both the carrot and the stick of crony capitalism that is pushing more and more centralization and less actual market competition and innovation.
Wow. I know, Stefan, also that you've written about how some of the parallels between what's going on today and the history of socialism. Can you speak to that a little bit for our viewers?
Sure, and I know I'm not alone in making this point. Again, I'm currently reading Christopher Rufo's book on cultural Marxism, and there are some others that are out there that are very good at tracing the lineage in the history. But certainly on the diversity front, this whole breaking down our society into an oppressor and an oppressed class, and then viewing everything through that lens, very much mimics the Marxist distinction between, labor and capital. It's just now been shifted to the race lens, which is very disconcerting, right? It's essentially a neo-racism that we're seeing being implemented. So you've got that piece of it, this way of breaking down society into these two opposing forces, and nothing else really gets considered than what you've now broken society down into. But then also the centralization piece of it, right? Where all of these forces are more and more pushing towards, well, we need these ESG groups that are going to, identify the factors for everybody and come up with ratings. And then we need the World Economic Forum, and we need the UN. And if you pay attention and you know what you're looking for, you just see the convergence of these, ESG, DEI agendas, along with this push towards a centralization and an ideology that is very similar to communism.
That is why somebody like you and the Free Enterprise Project are so refreshing, because we feel like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And at least there's people, they understand the lay of the land, they know how the legal system and politics works, are doing something, speaking up, and it's music to our ears when we hear what you're saying. But what can we do as these people who feel helpless? Are we helpless? Can we make a difference?
No, not at all. I think there's a lot of reason actually for optimism. Certainly the effectiveness of the boycotts that we saw with Target and Disney and Bud Light, that was new ground. Right? I think up until then, management basically thought they could ignore their conservative consumers because we were pro-business and we didn't like boycotting. And so there's been really a watershed where now they simply cannot ignore what is essentially their consumer base in a lot of these situations. But I also like to think about this again in terms of various buckets that you can think about making your voice heard as. So for example, if you do own shares in a corporation, you can speak out as a shareholder. And we at the Free Enterprise Project will have various ways that people can get involved. We're doing a survey right now where people are letting us know on the website which companies they think are the worst actors in this space. You can reach out to management as an investor. As a consumer, again, certainly the boycott, the speaking up is effective. And then I would say there really is something, because I understand the vast majority of people, their lives are full. They're working 9 to 5. They've got family. They've got sporting events. To try to fit in some form of activism seems overwhelming, right? And I think the left is counting on this. And so I really suggest what I like to refer to as Zen golf, right? Just move the ball towards the hole some minimal amount. So, for example, obviously we would love to have your contributions at the National Center and the Free Enterprise Project, but there's a lot of other great organizations. Find one that you can believe in, and don't give so much that you're taking food off the table, but give enough that it hurts a little, right? That it's meaningful to you. And what will happen is you'll get information from them that I have myself found to be a rewarding way of staying on top of information. So that's another way to get involved, right? There's obviously also the amplifying that people can do on social media. It may seem like you're not doing a lot if you have, 15 followers or 10 followers, but it really does all add up. And we've seen this now through a number of years. When you hear something that you agree with, that you believe in, you can amplify it. And again, I get it. You don't want to necessarily be blasting everybody on Facebook who's your friend with this stuff. That can be a turnoff. But there's a time and a place for doing that.
And when you talk about free enterprise and things like that, you did say something earlier about the education system and the big part that plays in this. Do you see any particular direction consumers can go to really pull that back and say, wait a minute, this education system is not working? Is there something that's having some effect on that?
I think certainly, again, we've had some great wins, I think, with the school boards and the parents that have finally, once they saw what was actually going on at these schools, particularly, through the COVID distance learning, have had a real impact. And now the battle is really joint, right? And so you can find groups, if that's really your focus, you can find groups that really focus on that and support them and follow them and amplify their message as well. So there's definitely a lot going on in that space that's very positive. And we have states like Florida and Texas and a number of others that are taking this up legislatively. And I did forget to mention that also contacting your legislature and telling them how you feel about various bills one way or the other, that really makes a difference. Because generally, if they hear from one person, they assume there's a whole lot of others that feel the same way but aren't speaking up.
Right.
I love your suggestions, especially I'm glad you pointed out that you can sit and be happy that you have the Free Enterprise project in the National Center for Public Policy Research, but you can support them. You know, they really rely on your donations, and so we can join forces. And we saw when we stop putting our money somewhere, like with Bud Light and Target, it makes a difference. So the opposite is true too when we put our money towards something. So thank you, Stefan, for joining us, and thank you for all your work.
Thanks so much. It's been great to be here with you all.